Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. This month I am very excited to be a guest designer for Shimmerz paints. The color kits include everything that you need to make beautiful layouts. There are Shimmerz paints, lots of beautiful pattern papers, and also some embellishments in the kit. For this layout, I chose this yellow and white pattern paper for the background. I really loved it just the way that it was. I did want to add my own little touch to it, but I didn't go crazy adding a lot of mixed media because it already has a mixed media look to it. I decided I wanted to add some heat embossing to the background. I used a stamp in my stash that has an image of script writing. I used some embossing powder from Martha Stewart. It's white embossing powder. And then I added that in several places on the background. I didn't put any embossing on the right-hand side. I just kept it on the left-hand side. I'm using 2 photos on this layout. I just mounted them on some white cardstock and then again on some pattern paper from the kit. Now I'm using some watered down white acrylic paint and I'm splattering that all over the background, mainly on the left because you can't really see the white paint on the right hand side. And although I knew I was using 2 photos and lots of fussy cut pieces, I wasn't sure exactly what the composition was going to be, so I'm adding the splatters all over the yellow part of the layout. You could see off to the left, I have a whole bunch of flowers that I fussy cut out of some of the pattern papers. And because I have so many flowers, I wanted to add lots of leaves. Well, I always like to add lots of leaves to my layout. I used 2 dies that I had in my stash and I cut a whole bunch of branches using one of the pattern papers that was in the May kit. Now I'm inking the edges of all of these leaves. I'm using some Distress Oxide. The color is called Iced Spruce. I don't think that I ever used this color before, but it was a perfect match for these leaves. I'm inking the flowers now. I use some Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide, and I'm inking the edges of the white flowers and also the pink flowers with the Victorian Velvet. I also am going to use this banner that's off to the right. So each time I used a color that would match one of the sections of the banner, I went ahead and inked that. So by the end, the whole banner was inked. The banner and also some yellow hearts that are on the mat right now, I got those from an entire sheet of images that you could fussy cut out. I've gotten to really love adding banners to my layouts. I often put them underneath the photos, and that's what I'm going to do today. Now I'm inking the edges of those orangey yellow flowers, and I'm using another color that I very rarely use, if I have ever used it before. It's called brushed corduroy. The brushed corduroy is a little bit darker than the color of the flowers, and I like the way that it looks on the edges. Earlier, I added some white splatters to the background. Now I'm adding some yellow splatters. I'm using the Shimmerz color Golden Wheat. I watered it down a little bit, and now I am tapping my scissors against my paintbrush, and it creates some tiny splatters. I'm putting it on both sides of the background because the color is a little bit darker than the yellow that's already on the pattern paper, and so you can see it on both sides of the background. I wanted to give my photos some dimension, so I used some fun foam and I put that on the back of one of the photos. I was going to put it on both photos, but then I was thinking I would probably want to overlap the photos, so I end up just putting it on the photo on the left. And I arranged the 2 photos on the layout. I made the one on the left a little bit higher than the one on the right. And I'm using some ATG adhesive to hold it in place. This will only hold it temporarily, so I do have to go back when I'm done with the layout and put some wet glue behind both of the photos. I really like the option of being able to move things around, so I like the ATG adhesive. It holds it down really well, but I can still lift it up if I have to move it around a little bit. I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to arrange the flowers, so I'm just trying them out in different spots around the photos. I'm making a small cluster in the upper right-hand corner, and then I knew I wanted to have flowers on both sides of the photo cluster, but I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to place each of the flowers. I did know that once I started to form clusters that I wanted to have a variety of different colors in each of the clusters. There are about 5 different colors of flowers. There are plenty of the larger white flowers, and then there are a number of smaller flowers that are pink or yellowish or orangey, and then there are just a couple of smaller green flowers. So I'm trying to balance that, have a representation of each of those colors in each of the different spots on the layout. At first, I had a number of tiny flowers on the outside of the clusters. Later on, I moved a lot of those into the clusters. I just felt that it made the layout look more cohesive and a little less random by having all the flowers, or most of the flowers, connected together. I feel like I have the arrangement that I want, so I begin attaching everything down to the layout. I'm using ATG adhesive. As I move to each cluster, I choose 1 or 2 flowers and I pop them up on some foam to add a little bit of dimension to each of the clusters. So for the upper right-hand corner, I popped up the white flower on some foam. In the lower right-hand side, I popped up the pink flower on some foam. I just picked whichever flower I thought should be layered on the top of the other flowers and added some fun foam and popped it up. I didn't want to pop up the banner because I felt it was a little too fragile for that, so I just attached that right down to the layout without any dimension. I continued going from cluster to cluster on the layout, attaching the flowers down. I attached down the flowers that I had already placed on the layout, and then I also added a few new flowers to each of the clusters, just trying to fill in some spaces and also have a variety of different sizes of flowers. And there were a lot of different size flowers, and I think that that makes a really pretty cluster. These photos are of both of my daughters, Danielle and Julia, and they were taken several years ago at my sister's house. We were celebrating Easter Sunday there, and I always love Easter Sunday. It's so nice to see everybody there at the same time, seeing all the kids together. Years ago, my older daughter went to a school. They didn't have an Easter break, so she was often not able to come home on Easter. That and the pandemic has really made me value the times that we're all together, and it definitely is not something that I take for granted like I used to. Now I have all of those flowers attached down to the page, and now I can embellish them using those branches that I had inked a little bit earlier. I love the color combination of the bluish green leaves with the pink and white and orangey flowers. I always continue arranging even as I am attaching things down to the page, gluing them down. I always find myself trying different elements in different places. I don't think that it can hurt because you really can't tell what something looks like until you try placing it in that position. Once I had all of those branches attached down to the layout, I began using ATG adhesive and attaching them down to the page. I usually use gel glue to attach things like branches down to the layout. For this layout, I just decided to use the ATG adhesive. Sometimes very small, delicate items can get broken using the ATG gun. I was lucky that that didn't happen on this layout, but it can happen if too much pressure is applied when dispensing the tape. So I had to be very careful. I thought the cluster to the left-hand side of the photo was just a little bit too big, so I decided to rearrange a couple of flowers so there would be a little space in between them. Now I'm adding some of the yellow fussy cut hearts to the layout. There were 3 of them in 3 different sizes, so I placed them in the 3 different clusters that surrounded the photo, and then I attach those down. There was a heart embellishment that I wanted to include on this layout, and I put it on top of the photo on the left. I trimmed back one of the flowers in the upper right-hand corner so that it wouldn't be overhanging the side of the page. I was thinking that the layout was almost complete, and then I realized I did not have a title on my layout. Using a Felicity Jane puffy alphabet from the Rebekah collection, I spelled out the word love on the banner. I thought these letters were the perfect size. I also liked the way there were some little tiny hearts and stars in this letter pack, so I added some hearts to the yellow hearts. And then between the sections of the banner, I added some white stars, and I liked that little detail. Now I'm adding some photo corners to my layout. I love to add photo corners, and I use an EK Success photo corner punch to punch these out of some pattern paper and then add them to both photos. I used some Distress Oxide in Victorian Velvet, and I inked the edges of all of the photo corners. And then I used ATG adhesive and I attached them down to the page. Although I thought I had attached all of them down, and I later realized I forgot to attach the photo corners on the left-hand photo, and luckily I realized that before I lifted up the layout. There were some white dots in that letter pack, and I think maybe they were periods, but I took one of them and I added it to the heart embellishment on the top of the photo on the left-hand side. If you have been following me for a while, you may know that I love to add die cuts like this to my floral clusters. I like having a very delicate element tucked in with the other elements in floral clusters. And then I also like the idea of adding a neutral color back into these very colorful clusters. It just helps to break them up a little bit. The die that I use to make these die cuts is from Sentimentally Yours. They are created by Phil Martin, and this particular die is called Berry Branches. Even though it's supposed to be berries, I think that when it's cut out of white cardstock, it looks more like little buds that you would see on branches. I usually trim these down a little bit. On this layout, I really just wanted there to be little touches, so I cut them a little bit shorter than usual. Something I really like about this particular die is that you can cut the die cut in half, and then you could use both the top and the bottom, which is really useful for me because I often cut these into smaller pieces and then sometimes you have to throw the rest of the die cut away. But in this case, I can also use the other half of it on the layout. I wanted to add a little bit more embossing powder to the bottom center of the layout. It just looked like there was a little something missing there. So I again used my stamp and my white Martha Stewart embossing powder, and then I heat embossed that area. I found that these Shimmerz papers, they are great for heat embossing. I find with some papers that the embossing powder will stick in places that you don't want it to. On this paper, though, the embossing powder only stuck to where I put the adhesive. And then for the flowers, when I inked the edges, the color of the ink was very vivid. So overall, I found this paper really great to work with, not just for the designs, but also for its quality. I use a touch of gel glue on each of those die cut pieces and attach those down to the page. I wanted to add a little bit more yellow on the right. I think I used a paintbrush that was a little bit too small because it made many really tiny splatters, and that really wasn't the look I was going for. I started to blot them up, but then I realized the splatters are so tiny that it doesn't even matter because you can barely see them. I decided to use the paintbrush to make some larger dots in a couple of places on the right-hand side of the layout. I don't think there's any substitute for real authentic splattering, but sometimes, especially when I want to apply splatters late in the process of making the layout like this, I will use a small paintbrush and just dot on the color. It's a little bit more controlled, and this way I don't make any mistakes and get color in places where I don't want it. I added a few smaller flowers to a couple of the larger flowers, and that is the last touch that I add to this layout, and here are some close-ups. If you would like to try out one of the many varieties of Shimmerz paints, or if you would like to add to your current collection and you're placing an order with Shimmerz, please put my name in the comments and you will receive a free gift. And who doesn't love to get a free gift with their order? If you would like to get a coordinated set of paints, embellishments, and pattern papers, check out this month's color kit. I put the link in the description box as well. I hope that everybody has a wonderful day, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.